After my husband's funeral, my only son drove me down a long, empty stretch of desert road and told me to get out of the car. He didn't shout. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "This is where you get off, Mom. Everything's mine now." Then he drove away, leaving me in the dust and silent. That was the moment I knew I had to take back control. My name is Ruth Merriman. I'm 68 years old, and until that day, I thought I understood what heartbreak felt like. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Somewhere warm, I hope. Somewhere safe, because I wasn't. I was standing in the middle of nowhere, wearing my black funeral dress and holding my husband's folded flag like it was a life raft. The sun was dipping low, the kind of golden hour that makes everything look soft and forgiving. But there was no softness left in me. Just the ache in my legs and the roar of the wind cutting through the silence Daniel left behind. I kept thinking, he'll come back. He'll realize what he's done. Mothers think like that. We believe our children are still the people we raised, not the strangers they become. But he didn't come back. I turned slowly, scanning the road, miles of nothing but scrub and dust. The asphalt shimmered like water, mocking me. I had no phone, no bag, not even a bottle of water. My son had taken my purse before the funeral, saying he'd keep it safe. I suppose he did for himself. The wind tugged at my hair, and I clutched the flag tighter. It was the last piece of my husband I had left, George Merriman, 42 years of marriage. We built a life from nothing, a small house, a patch of garden, a son we loved more than air. And now, both of them were gone. I started walking. There was nowhere to go, but I couldn't just stand there. My shoes sank into the dust, and the road stretched ahead like a punishment. Every few steps, I thought I heard a car behind me, but it was just the wind or the echo of my own heartbeat. The horizon blurred as the tears started again. I thought about the years George and I spent scrimping to send Daniel to college, the sacrifices, the late nights, the quiet pride when he graduated. He'd been so charming then, all ambition and promise. George used to say, "That boy's going to carry our name farther than we ever could." Well, he did, straight into greed. After about an hour of walking, I saw headlights in the distance, faint but real. My heart leapt and then hesitated. Out here, help could be anything or anyone. The car slowed as it approached, tires crunching gravel. A weathered blue pickup. It stopped a few feet away, engine idling low. The driver's window rolled down and a man leaned out, tanned skin, graying beard, eyes that studied me carefully before softening with recognition. "Mrs. Merriman?" he said, voice rough like gravel. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Nobody had called me that since the funeral. He stepped out, slow and cautious, like he didn't want to scare me. "It's Caleb Dunn. You taught me 10th grade English, remember? You used to say my essays had more heart than grammar." I blinked at him, disoriented. The years rearranged themselves in my mind. A teenage boy with ink-stained hands, sitting in the back row, hiding a kind smile behind a mop of dark hair. "Caleb," I whispered. "You work at the old auto shop by the highway, don't you?" He nodded. "Still do. I was heading home when I saw you out here. What happened?" The question broke something open in me. Words tangled behind my lips, the funeral, the will, the betrayal. But all that came out was, my son left me. Caleb's jaw tightened. He glanced down the road where Daniel had disappeared. Then he looked back at me, eyes steady. "Get in the truck, Mrs. Merriman. Let's get you somewhere safe." I hesitated. It felt wrong to climb into another man's vehicle when the last one had left me abandoned, but the wind was picking up, and the horizon was fading to gray. I nodded, clutching the flag to my chest, and climbed in. The seat smelled of oil and pine soap. Caleb didn't ask any more questions. He just turned the truck around and drove, slow and careful, as if the road might shatter under us. Through the window, I watched the place where Daniel had left me grow smaller until it disappeared entirely. And I didn't know it then, but getting into that truck was the first step toward taking my life back. Caleb's truck hummed softly as we drove back toward town. I sat stiffly, hands folded over the folded flag, staring at the road ahead like it was a wound that wouldn't close. Neither of us spoke much. The hum of the tires filled the silence between us, the kind of silence that's too full to touch. When we finally reached the outskirts of town, I saw the familiar curve of Maple Ridge Road, the turnoff that led to my house, my home, my garden, the porch swing George built for me on our 10th anniversary. "Here," I said quietly. "You can drop me here, I'll be fine." Caleb looked unconvinced. "You sure someone's home?" I nodded. "My son is there." The words scraped like sandpaper. He pulled into the driveway. The house looked almost exactly as I'd left it that morning, neat, quiet, ordinary. But there was something off. A single curtain drawn where it shouldn't be, a light on in the wrong room. I stepped out, feeling my knees tremble. "Thank you, Caleb. Truly." He hesitated, then said softly, "You take care of yourself, Mrs. Merriman." And then he drove off, his taillights fading into the dusk. I stood there for a moment before walking up the path. The air smelled of lilacs, the ones George planted for me years ago, but the sweetness just made the ache in my chest sharper. I knocked once, then again. No answer. When I tried the door, it opened easily. Inside, the lights were on. My house looked rearranged. The framed photographs from the hallway were gone. The shelves were bare except for a few new decorative pieces, things I'd never seen before. And then I heard his voice. "Mom?" Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs wearing jeans and one of George's old sweaters, the one I'd packed away after the funeral. "Why are you here?" he asked flatly. I blinked, stunned. "Why am I here? This is my home." He came down a few steps, arms folded. "No, it's mine. You can't just walk in here." I thought he was joking at first. My lips even twitched in disbelief. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" He sighed like I was an inconvenience. "Dad's will. Everything was left to me. The house, the savings, the car. It's all in my name now. You should have read it before you signed the documents." I stared at him, my heart thudding painfully. "Documents? You mean those forms you said were for insurance?" He didn't look away. "It's done, Mom. You can't stay here." For a long moment, I just stood there. The silence in that hallway was heavier than any grief I'd ever felt. I could see my reflection in the glass of the grandfather clock, small, tired, and utterly invisible. "Where do you expect me to go?" I asked softly. "That's not my problem," he said. "There's a motel near the interstate. You'll figure something out." I don't remember leaving. I remember the sound of the door closing behind me, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, and the realization that my son, my only child, had just turned me out of my own home. That night, I stayed in a motel room that smelled of bleach and loneliness. The wallpaper was peeling, and the air conditioner rattled like it was choking on dust. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the folded flag, staring at nothing. Somewhere between the sobs, I remembered George's last weeks, the way Daniel hovered over the paperwork, always insisting, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll handle it." George could barely hold a pen. He was so medicated he could barely tell the days apart. A cold thought crept through me. What if the will he signed wasn't the one we agreed on? The next morning, as I stepped outside for some air, a familiar blue pickup pulled into the lot. Caleb got out, holding a paper cup of coffee in a brown paper bag. "I figured you might not have eaten," he said, offering them wordlessly. I took the coffee, my hands shaking. "How did you know I was here?" He shrugged. "Small town, news travels." I smiled weakly. Not the kind of news I wanted traveling. He sat on the hood beside me, careful not to intrude. "You don't have to tell me anything, but if you need help, I know people. Folks who can get you back on your feet." I wanted to say no. to keep my pride, to pretend I still had some control over my life, but the truth was I had nothing. So I nodded. "Thank you, Caleb." He handed me the paper bag, a ham sandwich, a banana, a note tucked inside in careful handwriting. "You taught me how to read stories that mattered. Maybe now it's time you write your own." I held that note for a long time after he left. And as the morning light crept through the motel curtains, one thought burned brighter than the rest. It wasn't grief that kept me awake that night, it was fury. I didn't plan on staying. The motel was supposed to be a pause, a holding place between the life I'd lost and the one I hadn't figured out yet. But days passed, and I found myself waking up each morning to the rattle of the air conditioner and the sound of semis rumbling down the highway, wondering if maybe this was it. The end. Then, on the fourth morning, Caleb came by again. He stood by the open door with that gentle uncertainty some men carry, the kind that comes from having seen enough hurt to know you can't fix it. Only stand near it. "I've got a guest room above my shop," he said. "Nothing fancy, a bed, a little kitchenette. You could stay there until you figure out your next step. Rent-free." I opened my mouth to refuse. Pride leapt up like a reflex, but then I caught sight of myself in the mirror, hair unwashed, shoulders slumped, the flag folded neatly on the nightstand, like a reminder of who I used to be. So instead, I asked, "You're sure it's no trouble?" He smiled, small and kind. "You gave me my first passing grade in English. I owe you one." That's how I ended up living above Dunn's Auto Repair. The room was simple white walls, a little table, lace curtains that fluttered in the afternoon breeze. From the window, I could see the fields stretching beyond the town, gold and endless. It wasn't home, but it was peace. Caleb didn't hover. He just made sure I had what I needed: groceries, clean linens, an occasional cup of coffee left on the step outside my door. I started cooking again, small meals for two. Sometimes we ate together in the shop after hours, him on a workbench, me on an upturned crate, the smell of motor oil mixing with roasted chicken and the faint sweetness of cornbread. It felt human again. One evening after dinner, he asked gently, "You ever think about teaching again?" I laughed. "At my age? Who'd hire an old English teacher?" He shrugged. "There's a few kids around here who could use help. Some of the mechanics' families, hard-working folks, but reading's not their thing. You always said stories make sense of things. Maybe that's what they need." That night, I thought about it. About how for 40 years I'd taught children how to find meaning in words, how to see themselves in stories and not feel so alone. Maybe that was something I still had to give. The next day, I put up a handwritten sign outside the shop. "Free tutoring, reading, writing, homework help, upstairs on Wednesdays." The first week, only one boy came. His name was Eli 11, shy, wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too big. He barely looked at me when he handed over his worksheet, but by the third session he was reading aloud with pride, stumbling but smiling. Soon, word spread. A few more children showed up, carrying dog-eared notebooks and pencils bitten at the ends. Their laughter filled the small room, and something inside me began to thaw. At night, when the shop went quiet, I wrote in a journal Caleb had given me. At first, it was just fragments, memories of George, of Daniel as a boy, of the house I'd lost. But slowly, those fragments turned into something else. Not grief, not rage, but reflection. One evening, I found Caleb fixing an old truck, grease on his hands, country music playing low from a radio. "Those kids look up to you," he said, without looking up. I smiled faintly. "I just give them a place to sit and listen. That's all." He set down his wrench, meeting my eyes. Sometimes that's more than anyone's ever given them. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and turned to leave. But as I climbed the stairs, I caught sight of my reflection in the window standing taller, a faint glow in my face I hadn't seen since before George got sick. It wasn't the kind of joy that bursts. It was the kind that hums quietly, like a song remembered from long ago. Weeks passed. I stopped checking the mailbox for letters from Daniel. I stopped replaying the sound of his voice saying, "Everything's mine now." One morning, I woke to birds outside the window and realized I hadn't cried in days. It startled me, that peace. It was fragile, like glass, but it was real. That night, as the sun slipped behind the fields, I wrote in my journal. For the first time in months, I went to sleep without crying. And I did. I slept deeply, dreamlessly unaware that the past wasn't finished with me yet. Peace has a quiet sound. It hums like the refrigerator at night or the steady ticking of a wall clock when you're finally learning how to breathe again. For months, that was my life. Teaching the kids upstairs, sharing quiet dinners with Caleb, writing in my journal. My days had rhythm again, a slow, steady beat that didn't hurt to follow. Hey, then, one afternoon in late October, my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but I knew it before I read it. Daniel. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Mom?" His voice was careful, low. "I've been thinking about you." I didn't say anything. The word thinking didn't mean much coming from the boy who'd left me on the side of the road. He cleared his throat. I was out of line that day. Things were messy. I shouldn't have said what I did. Maybe we could meet, talk it through. Part of me wanted to hang up. Another part, the mother part, wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe there was still some goodness left under all that greed. So I agreed. "All right, Daniel, let's talk." We met at the diner by the highway, the same one we used to stop at after Sunday church when he was little. The waitress still remembered us. "Coffee for you, honey?" she asked, like no time had passed at all. Daniel sat across from me, his suit too crisp for the dusty little diner. He smiled like a man trying to sell something. "I've been thinking about Dad," he began. "About what he wanted. I know you're angry, but he wanted me to take care of things." I set my cup down gently. "Take care of things, Daniel. You forged his will." He froze, eyes narrowing just slightly. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "I've been going through some papers. There are signatures that don't match, clauses that weren't there in the copy we discussed with the lawyer, and you filed it the day after he died." A flicker, guilt, fear, passed through his eyes before he smoothed it over with that same polite smile. "Mom, you're confused. You don't know how legal documents work." I laughed quietly, the sound surprising even me. "I may be old, Daniel, but I'm not stupid." He leaned back, sighing. "Look, I didn't come here to argue. I came to make things right. If you sign a few documents for me, I can release some money into your account. You'll be comfortable again. No hard feelings." And that was the moment I realized he wasn't here to make peace. He was here to buy my silence. I stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping the tile. "I'm not signing anything, Daniel. Not until I know the truth." His smile vanished. "Then you'll get nothing." I met his eyes, steady and cold. "I already have nothing. You took care of that." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, threw a few bills on the table, and walked out. His reflection in the diner window shimmered and disappeared like a ghost. I sat there, long after he left, my coffee gone cold. That night, I told Caleb everything. I expected him to be angry, maybe even protective, but he just listened, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Finally, he said, "You gonna let him win?" I frowned. "What choice do I have?" He tossed the rag onto the bench. "You've got more than you think. I know a lawyer in town, Sarah Langley. Smart woman, fair. She helped my sister when her ex tried to pull something similar. You should talk to her." I hesitated. "A lawyer costs money." Caleb smiled. "You taught half this town's kids how to read. I think we can manage a consultation." The next day, I met Sarah. Sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of woman who didn't waste words. I told her everything, the will, the signatures, the day Daniel drove me out and left me there. She listened quietly, then said, "If what you're saying is true, Mrs. Merriman, your son committed fraud. We can prove it." "Can we?" I whispered. Her gaze was firm. "You taught others how to find truth in stories. Now let's find it in yours." When I left her office, the late afternoon sun was warm on my face. For the first time since George's death, I felt something new, not grief, not fear, determination. I walked back to Caleb's shop, my steps slow but sure. For years, I told him that evening, I lived by the rules of men who thought they knew best. That day, I started writing my own. He didn't answer. He just nodded, and for once, I didn't need anyone to speak for me. Some mornings, when I woke before dawn, I could almost believe none of it had happened. For a few quiet seconds, I'd expect to hear George's slippers shuffling down the hall or smell the coffee he always brewed too strong. Then I'd open my eyes to the pale ceiling above Caleb's shop and remember the truth. They were both gone, one to the grave, the other to greed. But grief has a strange alchemy. If you sit with it long enough, it starts to change shape from pain to clarity, from tears to fire. That fire began to burn the day Sarah, the lawyer, called. She had gone through the documents. I'd given her copies of the will, old financial statements, notes George had scribbled before his final hospitalization. "Ruth," she said, "you were right. The will was altered. The signature on the final page isn't your husband's. It's traced." I sat there in silence, phone pressed to my ear, watching dust float in the sunlight. Traced. Such a small word for such a massive betrayal. Sarah continued, "Legally, we can challenge it, but I'll need proof, something to connect your son to the forgery. Emails, witnesses, bank transfers, anything." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not with fear, but resolve. I spent the next few weeks gathering everything I could. Old papers, receipts, and messages. Caleb helped me comb through boxes of George's belongings, carefully sorting and labeling each one like sacred relics. There were days my heart clenched so hard I had to stop, breathing through the memories, George's handwriting on the margins of his gardening books, the faded notes from the first Christmas Daniel spent away at college. Every piece was a reminder of how much love we'd poured into that boy and how thoroughly he'd emptied us in return. One night, as I sat surrounded by papers, Caleb brought me tea. "You've been at this for hours," he said softly. "I can't stop now," I whispered. "If I do, I'll lose my courage." He sat beside me, quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're stronger than you think, Ruth." I smiled faintly. "I don't feel strong." He looked at me with something deep and steady in his eyes. "That's usually when you are." It was the first time I realized that Caleb wasn't just a kind man. He was a man who saw me not as someone broken, but as someone still burning. In early winter, Sarah called again. "Ruth, we found something," she said. "Bank transfers. Money moved from your husband's account to your son's, months before the will was signed. Thousands of dollars. It looks like Daniel was taking advantage of his father long before he passed." The words hit me like a blow. He was stealing from him? I'm afraid so. I felt dizzy. For a long time, I'd told myself that Daniel's greed had started with the will, that grief had warped him. But this meant it had been growing in him like rot for years. That night, I walked outside behind the shop where the winter air was sharp and clean. Caleb followed quietly. "You okay?" he asked. "I thought I knew my son," I said. "Turns out I didn't know him at all." He didn't offer comfort, and I was grateful for that. He just stood beside me in silence until the wind settled. A few days later, Daniel called again. His voice was sharper now, almost panicked. "Mom, I heard you've been talking to a lawyer. You need to stop. This is getting out of hand." "I'm only looking for the truth," I said evenly. "You're going to ruin everything," he hissed. "Dad wanted me to take care of things. You're just..." He stopped himself, then sighed. "Meet me at the house. Tomorrow. We'll talk." Against every warning bell in my body, I agreed, because part of me still needed to look him in the eye to understand how my own flesh and blood could do this. When I arrived, he was pacing the living room. The house looked different, colder, emptier. The photos of George and me were gone. New ones of Daniel and his friends lined the mantel. "Mom," he started, trying to sound calm. "We don't need lawyers. Just sign this and let's move on." He pushed a folder toward me. My heart hammered, but my voice was steady. I'm not signing anything. Tell me the truth, Daniel. Did you forge that will?" He laughed a short, bitter sound. "You really think I'd do that?" "I don't think," I said softly. "I know." His mask slipped. "Fine," he snapped. "Yes, I did it. I had to. Dad was going to leave it all to you, and you would have wasted it on your charity projects and your stupid garden." He didn't realize my phone was recording from the table beside me. When he finished his rant, I stood up. "Thank you," I said simply, and walked out. In the truck outside, my hands were trembling as I stopped the recording. I sent it to Sarah before I even started the engine. "He thought he'd buried the truth with his father," I whispered to myself, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror, but I was still alive. That night, for the first time, the fire inside me didn't burn from pain, it burned from power. The day of the hearing dawned gray and still, the kind of morning that feels like the world is holding its breath. I dressed carefully, a simple navy dress, the same one I'd worn to my last parent-teacher conference before retiring, a small silver brooch at my collar, George's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. It wasn't armor exactly, but it was something solid to carry into the fight. Caleb drove me to the courthouse. Neither of us spoke much during the ride. The town blurred past the windows, the diner, the church steeple, the field that always smelled of hay and rain. Every inch of it seemed both familiar and far away. At the steps, he reached over and squeezed my hand. "You've got this, Ruth." I nodded. "I know." Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. The benches creaked when I sat down beside Sarah. Across the room, Daniel sat with his lawyer-expensive suit, polished shoes, confidence like a mask. He didn't look at me. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Sarah stood first, calm and composed, and began to outline our case. The forged signature, the altered clauses, the bank transfers, and then the recording. When my voice filled the room, calm, steady, asking, "Did you forge that will?" I felt every eye turn toward Daniel. His own words echoed through the speakers. "Fine. Yes, I did it." He went pale. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge lifted a hand. "Overruled. Continue, Miss Langley." Sarah laid the evidence on the table: bank records, handwriting comparisons, emails Daniel had sent to a notary under a false name. The walls seemed to close in as the truth poured out. For months, I had imagined this moment, imagined I'd feel triumphant or vindicated. But sitting there, watching my son unravel under the weight of his own choices, all I felt was a deep, aching sadness. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, his voice trembled between anger and desperation. "She doesn't understand. Dad wanted this. He wanted me to handle things." The judge's gaze was steady. "Mr. Merriman, the evidence says otherwise." Daniel's eyes darted to me not with remorse, but with something close to fear. And that was when I realized he wasn't my little boy anymore. He hadn't been for a very long time. When the gavel struck wood, it sounded like thunder. The court ruled the will fraudulent. The estate, the property, and all remaining assets were to be restored to me as the lawful beneficiary. I should have felt victorious. But as people began to file out, I stayed seated, staring at the floor. Sarah touched my shoulder gently. "You did it, Ruth." I nodded slowly. "Yes, but I don't think I won." Outside, Caleb was waiting by the steps. He didn't ask how it went, he could tell from my face. "It's over," I said quietly. He studied me for a long moment. "No, it's just beginning." He was right. Over the next few weeks, paperwork and settlements filled my days. Daniel avoided me entirely. Word around town was that he'd left some said for the city, others for good. I didn't ask. I didn't need to know. When everything was finally settled, I drove to the old house one last time. The garden had gone wild lilacs overgrown, ivy curling around the porch rail. It didn't look like my home anymore. I walked through each room, touching the walls, the door frames, the window sills. Ghosts of laughter and arguments echoed faintly. I could almost hear George's voice teasing me about overwatering the hydrangeas. At the kitchen table, I laid the folded flag down gently and whispered, "It's done, George. He can't hurt us anymore." I stayed there for a while, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of dust and memory. Then I stood up and walked out. I sold the house a week later. People asked me why I didn't keep it now that it was rightfully mine again, but what they didn't understand was that some places can't be healed. The walls remember too much. When the final papers were signed, I stood outside the courthouse again, the same steps where it all began. The air felt lighter somehow, cleaner. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't come with trumpets or applause. It came in the quiet sound of my own footsteps walking away. Caleb was waiting by the truck, the passenger door already open. "Where to, Mrs. Merriman?" he asked with that half-smile of his. I looked out toward the long, empty stretch of road leading out of town, the same road where my son had once left me. "Home," I said, "wherever that is now." He nodded, started the engine, and together we drove toward the horizon, the light breaking through the clouds ahead of us. There's a moment after the storm when everything goes still, not silent, just honest. You can smell the rain in the soil, see how the world looks a little cleaner, though the damage is still there. That's what healing feels like, I think. Not a fresh start, just a clearer view of what's left standing. The road stretched ahead of us, golden in the late afternoon sun. Caleb drove with one hand on the wheel, windows cracked open to the wind. The desert that had once terrified me now looked almost beautiful, endless and shimmering, alive with light. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked softly. "Which part?" I said. "The house, the life before all this." I thought for a long time before answering. I miss who I was in it, but she's gone, and maybe that's all right. He nodded, eyes still on the road. We stopped at a diner just outside the county line, the kind of place with chipped mugs, cracked red booths, and a waitress who called everyone sweetheart. As we ate, I caught my reflection in the window. I barely recognized the woman, looking back older, yes, but not fragile. There was a steadiness there, a calm I hadn't felt in years. Caleb noticed my gaze. "You look different," he said. "Do I?" Like someone who stopped waiting for permission to live. That made me smile. Maybe I finally have. He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine, gentle, certain, unhurried. We didn't need to say more. Some connections don't announce themselves. They just settle quietly where they belong. In the weeks that followed, I started over in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, nothing grand, but it had a porch that caught the morning light and a patch of earth just begging to be planted. Caleb helped me fix the fence, paint the shutters, and string up lights under the oak tree out back. Every evening, I'd sit there with a cup of tea, listening to the cicadas hum and the world exhale. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe it was the one I was meant to find. Sometimes, I still thought of Daniel. I'd see a young man at the gas station with his mother, or hear a boy's laughter drift from a passing car, and for a second, my chest would ache with memory. People often asked me if I hated him for what he did. I never knew how to answer that. Hate feels too heavy to carry that far. I suppose I just let him go. You can't drag someone toward redemption. They have to walk that road themselves. One morning, a letter arrived, no return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. It was short. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm sorry for everything. I'm trying to do better. Daniel." I read it 3 times, tears spilling down my cheeks. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside George's old Bible, between the pages marked by a pressed lilac. I didn't respond. Some apologies don't need answers. just acknowledgement. That night, I lit a candle on the porch and whispered into the dark, "I forgive you." And for the first time, I meant it. As the months passed, the garden bloomed again, wildflowers in defiant colors, herbs in neat little rows, roses curling along the fence. Caleb and I would sit among them on warm evenings, talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes, I'd catch myself thinking back to that day on the deserted road, the dust, the silence, the moment my son's car disappeared, and then the sound of another engine, the glint of light, and the man who stopped when no one else did. That was the moment everything truly began, not when Daniel betrayed me, but when I realized I wasn't finished yet. Because life doesn't end when people leave you on empty roads. It begins when you start walking again, even if your legs tremble and your heart still aches. I tell myself that every morning as the sun breaks over the horizon. I am still here, still standing, still growing, still alive. And if anyone out there has ever been left behind by family, by love, by time itself, I want them to know this. The road doesn't end where someone else abandons you. That's just where your part begins. So, where are you watching from tonight? Wherever you are, I hope you keep walking, because the light always finds those who don't stop looking for it.